Dear President Roosevelt, life in America in 1858 when you were born was far different than the one I came into 100 years later in 1958. Back then, James Buchanan was the President of the United States, and history has ranked him as one of the worst to ever sit in the Oval Office. He was a dividing force between the North and South, alienating the Southern states that led to their secession as a prologue to the Civil War. Matter of fact, his nickname was Doughface, alluding to his ability to be molded by others' opinions, and perhaps the fact that he was a lifelong bachelor might have led to his unpleasant demeanor. A young up-and-comer, Abe Lincoln, was warning the 31 million Americans that a house divided itself cannot stand, and the 4 million black slaves must be set free. I'll spare the details that followed, but suffice to say that what Mr. Lincoln declared the same year you were born, unfortunately still rings true in the 21st century. For his commitment to the cause of freedom, he paid with his life. It must have been a sight to your young eyes as you watched the great man's funeral procession from an upper window in your grandfather's mansion in 1865. I wonder then if you knew that just 36 years later, you'd become our youngest president at 42, that you'd be the first president to win the Nobel Peace Prize in 1906, the first to fly in an airplane or own a car, have a telephone, or go past the actual boundary of the United States. I don't know if you've heard, but in the past 6 years, we've had an African-American president. It's a long way from another first, when you invited African-American Booker T. Washington to dinner in 1901, setting off a feeding frenzy in the media and shouts for your removal from office. I'm glad you told the elite to get stuffed, and if they didn't, it wouldn't be your head on the wall, but one of theirs. Surely Lincoln's assassination was in your mind when that revolver was pointed at you in Milwaukee as you ran for a third term under the Progressive banner in 1914. And while the bullet was slowed down by your eyeglass case and the 50-page speech in your pocket, the fact that it still went 5 inches into your chest and that you carried on in a blood-soaked shirt for 90 minutes on stage declaring, "It takes more than that to kill a bull moose," astounds me. I know you lost that election, and I've read that the defeat caused more pain than the slug that stayed in your chest the rest of your life. But I just really wanted to thank you for all that you've contributed to the growth and change of our nation. From creating the national park system to taking on big business, forcing them to take responsibility for their actions towards workers, and for being the trust buster, breaking up the corporate monopolies that were making a select few wealthy and pushing for a square deal for every man. It is perhaps your concern for the environment, though, that I admire most of all. It was your ability to see further than dollars and cents, like the time that you blocked a bill in 1908 by executive order that was being pushed into Congress by lobbyists that wanted permission to strip mine the Grand Canyon. You reminded countless generations to follow that we should leave it as it is, that we can't improve upon it, that the ages have been at work on it, and man can only mar it. What you can and should do is leave it for your children and for all that come after you as the one great sight that every American should see. Thank you for the bird sanctuaries, the monuments, and the 42 million acres of wilderness you set aside with the knowing that man, left to his own devices and not protected from his own greed, would develop, sell, and decimate as much ground as he can get his hands on. Thank you for not allowing the needs of the many to fall prey to the sins of a few for profit. I know that your last great adventure, mapping out the River of Doubt in 1913, deep in the then unknown Amazon, was not only your most arduous expedition, and it nearly cost you your life, but it was also your last chance to be a boy one more time. The fact that you had your own son Kermit by your side must have made it even more exhilarating. By the way, Mr. President, for most people, the word Amazon now is defined as an online virtual storefront that people buy nearly everything imaginable on. I bet you'd really love access to the books, having authored more than 35 yourself, but maybe not so much for the rest of the offerings that range from baby clothes to car parts to sex toys. On a side note, the Amazon you helped map out has now been burned and chopped and decimated to raise cattle to make hamburgers at drive-thru restaurants. But I digress. This morning, as I wonder what you would think of our country, now with 340 million of us banging around compared to the 90 million when you left office in 1909, to the technological advances that have us texting each other, connecting with people from around the world, oftentimes without the aid of wires, The incredible medical advances and the ability we have to bend the environment to our will, unfortunately at times with little regard for future generations. We are still a species addicted to the fossil fuels that once seemed infinite, but are not. I wonder how you would handle the American companies that poured their concrete foundations in our land only to shelter their assets overseas as a way to not pay their fair share of taxes. I wonder how you deal with these lesser life forms that so often crop up in the political realm, shrouding themselves in some false sense of patriotism, only to end up sending pictures of themselves without clothes on, or upon further inspection, exaggerating their military records or duty, something I can't imagine you would stand for after leading the Rough Riders into battle. I wonder what you would say about climate change, the internet, cable television, TV evangelists, rampant drug abuse, school shootings, the NRA, being a lifetime member yourself, the inept Congress, big oil, minimum wage, gay marriage, the GOP that stuffed you in the VP slot to keep you out of the way, only to have that move backfire when McKinley was assassinated. What would you say about the Democrats that can't get their act together? And how did the word progressive ever turn into a bad idea? Mr. President, there's just been a few real leaders in the White House, a handful really, since you passed away on that frostbitten night in January of 1919, 95 years ago. Your cousin, FDR, held us together, reminding us that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. Truman dropped the bomb. Ike held the fort. JFK took a bullet, and Reagan got a wall torn down. The rest held office and held court. Most of them had their wishbones where their backbones should have been. In closing, I just really wanted to thank you for one more thing more than anything I've previously listed in this letter. When I was a boy about 10 years old, I read a story about your life, how much you loved nature and overcame illness, that you built your body and your mind and spirit on the hard times and formed a foundation, a doctrine of living the strenuous life that advocated knowing yourself and trusting yourself, and by doing so, you'd encourage more leaders, not followers. That one story and Childcraft series of books would turn out to be a guidepost for me. It was a way of seeing the world and celebrating it, looking for ways I can use my time on the planet to leave it better than I found it, and to affirm the word bully, not as a negative thing, but a very positive thing. You know, I'm never going to sit in the Oval Office and have the power that you did, but your life inspired me in my own way to live bigger than I could have ever imagined. How did you say it? Quote, "Far better is it to dare mighty things, to win glorious triumphs, even though checkered by failure, than to take rank with those poor spirits who neither enjoy much nor suffer much because they live in the gray twilight that knows neither victory nor defeat." Happy 156th birthday, Mr. President, and thank you, sir.